Here in Romania at the NATO meeting, the Secretary of State condemned Vladimir Putin's attacks against Ukraine's energy supplies and told me that the U.S. is committed to defending the replacement equipment that the U.S. is now sending Ukraine. He also talked about Iran's crackdown on the protesters against the regime, and of course, that great soccer match, the U.S. victory over Iran. You've said that soccer is not geopolitical, but at this World Cup it certainly was. The Iranian state media was challenging U.S. policies publicly at a news conference. So it was certainly part of the text. And there was global outrage over what's happened to women. Hundreds arrested, many killed, many others injured, outrage around the world. So isn't there inevitably some significance, some impact of the U.S. victory over Iran?
Well, first, Andrea, let me just say how proud I am, like so many Americans are, of Team USA, how well they performed in this World Cup, including last night in the game against Iran. And by the way, I thought the Iranian players performed with incredible valor and heart throughout this tournament. And it was great to see these athletes doing what they do. And yes, I also believe strongly, because I see it every place I go, that football, as it's called in most parts of the world, soccer as we call it, really is a universal language, spoken pretty much everywhere. And it has a powerful way of bringing people together. People not only play soccer, they watch it, they argue about it, they get passionate about teams, whether it's a national team or whether it's a club team. That's a powerful thing. Of course, when you have countries that are playing against each other that are in a totally different area, in a rivalry, a competition, or have a fraught relationship, that can spill over. And I think the American players were incredibly dignified off the field, just as they were successful on the field. But our focus was on the game last night, but our focus every day, and the world's focus, is what's happening in the streets of Iran. The extraordinary courage of women in particular who've been standing up, speaking out for their basic rights. And we've seen that since the killing of Mahsa Amini some months ago. So that's where the attention is. We've been working to make sure that, to the best of our ability, those who've been involved in trying to repress the ability of the Iranian people and women to speak up and speak out, we've been sanctioning them. We've also been trying to make sure that Iranians have the ability to be able to communicate with one another and stay connected to the outside world, including through the provision of technology. So we're focused on that. Sometimes these things blend together, but for the most part, we're trying to do whatever we can do to make clear that we support what Iranians are asking for, demanding in the streets, which is to be heard, to be able to make their views known peacefully, and not to have this terrible repression that we're seeing.
Mr. Secretary, with so many women arrested, some killed, is there anything the U.S. government can do besides sanctions and helping them with internet access?
Well, Andrea, first, it's really important to make clear that this is about Iranians. This is about the women, the young people who are protesting, trying to make their voice heard. It's not about us. It's not about any other country. In fact, one of the profound mistakes that the regime makes is in accusing the United States or any other country of somehow being responsible for instigating what's happening. That's not at all the case. And to misunderstand their own people is at the heart of the problem that they're facing. But I think the most important thing that we can do is first to speak out very clearly ourselves in support of the people's right to protest peacefully, to make their views known, and as I said, to take what steps we can take to go after those who are actually repressing those rights, including through sanctions, and also to try to help the Iranian people remain connected to each other and connected to the world. That's exactly what we're doing.
The women tell me that they think that change is now inevitable, that there's no turning back. Do you agree with that?
It's very hard for us to judge. First, we don't have diplomatic relations. Our visibility into Iran is limited. And again, it's fundamentally about the Iranian people, their own aspirations, their own desires, their own needs for their futures, for their country. That's what will determine what happens and where this goes.
Now that they are accelerating their nuclear program to the point where they're just below the level of weapons grade, there's no diplomacy going on, clearly, from their side. They're not serious about it. So is the military option now the only option to stop them from having a nuclear weapon?
Look, we continue to believe that diplomacy is the most effective way to deal with the nuclear program. That's why we engaged in it over these past couple of years. When there was an agreement, the so-called JCPOA, it had put Iran's nuclear program into a box. The decision to pull out of that agreement allowed the program to get out of the box. And now what we're seeing is, as you said, Iran continuing to take steps to make that program ever more dangerous. And it is something that we are very concerned about, not just us, but many allies and partners around the world, starting with our European partners. So we've made clear to Iran in a variety of ways that if they continue to take steps to advance their program, we will also have to take steps to oppose that and to deal with that.
Let me ask you about Ukraine. The Secretary General said that Vladimir Putin is weaponizing winter. Mm-hmm. People are starving. They're freezing. They don't have water. And Putin is carpet bombing them at this point. Is there any way to make sure that as we spend millions repairing these substations, that he's not just going to take them out? And, you know, it's playing whack-a-mole.
So we're doing two things, because you're exactly right. What Putin's not able to do on the battlefield, he's actually not taking to civilians across the country by trying to deny them heat, deny them electricity, deny them water, to freeze them, to brutalize them in ways that we haven't seen in Europe in decades. And that's playing out across the entire country. It's not just the front lines in eastern and southern Ukraine. It's literally every part of the country. So two things are necessary, and two things are what we're focused on. One is, yes, making sure that to the best of our ability, we are getting to Ukraine what it needs to repair, to replace, to make more resilient its energy and electricity infrastructure. But at the same time, you're exactly right. We also need to make sure, again, to the best of our ability, that Ukrainians can defend that infrastructure. Otherwise, you just get into a cycle where stuff is destroyed, we help them replace it, it gets destroyed again, and that gets repeated. So throughout this Russian aggression, we've been working to make sure at every step along the way that Ukraine had in its hands the military equipment and weapons it needed to defend itself, to deter the Russian aggression, to push back. And the needs for Ukraine have evolved, depending on the nature of what Russia's doing.
But they've asked for bigger, longer, stronger weapons earlier. Was it a mistake not to give them more air defenses, Patriots, sooner?
We've been doing it all along. In fact, even before day one. When we saw the Russian aggression mounting, when we warned the world that it was likely to come, we didn't just say that. We didn't just warn people. Going back more than a year ago, we started to provide the Ukrainians with air defense systems, with things like Stinger missiles, javelins to deal with
what
tanks.
What about the Patriots now?
And then throughout, as we've seen the nature of the threat from Russia change, move to different parts of the country, use different tools, we've helped the Ukrainians adapt by making sure that the weapon systems that we were giving them, and many others are giving them, are actually fit for the threat that they're facing. It's not just getting them the weapon systems, it's making sure that they're trained on them, it's making sure that they can maintain them. There's a whole process that goes into that. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has convened a group of countries over many months now to make sure that we're doing that in a coordinated way. We've now just done the same thing on the energy side with G7 countries, as well as in coordination with the European Union, making sure that just as we're doing on the defense side, on the energy and electricity side, we're organized and coordinated. We're bringing all of that together to help Ukraine get through the winter.
In China, they're cracking down on the protesters. In some ways, does that give us more leverage? Has President Xi Jinping been weakened by this?
Well, I can't speak to what this says about his standing, but what I can say is this. First, the zero COVID policy that we've seen in China is not something that we would do. And we've been focused on making sure that people have safe and effective vaccines, that we have testing, that we have treatment, and that has proven effective. China has to figure out a way forward on dealing with COVID, a way forward that answers the the health needs, but also answers the needs of people. We can't address that for them. I think any country where you see people trying to speak out, to protest peacefully, to make known their frustrations, whatever the issue is, in any country where we see that happening, and then we see the government take massive repressive action to stop it, that's not a sign of strength, it's a sign of weakness.
Garrett, the Secretary of State also talked about Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan, both unlawfully detained in Russia, and the Whelan family's concerns about his condition, his whereabouts. And we also talked about the rise of anti-Semitism in America and around the world. More coming up later in the program. Back to you.